People typically don't fail because their product sucks.
I consider Whole Foods one of the hardest in the country. I have encouraged entrepreneur after entrepreneur to not worry about Whole Foods in the beginning.
Welcome back to Seed Money. Today we have an amazing guest, somebody I wish I knew 20 years ago. We have Debbie Wildrick with us. She is a powerhouse sales, marketing, operations executive with 30 plus years in consumer packaged goods. She has helped bring products to shelves and screens across every major food channel. She has led at giants like 7-Eleven and Tropicana and scaled plenty of early stage brands. She also co-founded MetaBrand to guide hundreds of launches, and she now mentors founders through her new program, the 10 Pillars of a Successful Company. So welcome, Debbie. So good to see you and have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Doing great. Every day is a great day, isn't it? Especially in sunny Florida.
I know, yeah. I'm in sunny Santa Barbara, although it's a little foggy here today. So, if the sun's not out, it's like, well, poor us. But overall, yeah, still cannot complain. The sun's here. What part of Florida are you in? You're in Southern, right?
And Naples, Southwest Florida. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Love it. Amazing. Okay. Well, like I said, I wish I knew you 20 years ago when I was naively jumping into the very challenging beverage alcohol space. Extra challenges for me. It's a crazy, I think consumer products in general has its own set of challenges. I talk to a lot of tech companies. Everything it has its challenges, but consumer products have their own special little place. And, but at the same time, I love consumer products. It's so fun to have this like tangible thing and like the design and I don't know, there's just so much good stuff behind it. But I think it is extra relevant to this podcast because while a lot of tech companies can bootstrap, consumer products are typically a lot harder to bootstrap. You have inventory, you have legitimate things you have to pay for. So what I'd love to start off with, and then I want to get into your whole 10 pillars. I think this could be like 10 episodes with you, honestly, to go through all of your knowledge. But I'd love to start off with the funding piece, because I think obviously that's what we're talking about here on this podcast, and getting that, person's view who's seen it from the 30,000 foot level a million times can be so valuable to the person who is just in the trenches at that moment. So start off, tell us a little bit about your perspective on funding for consumer products in the early stages and just kind of how you work with people on that side of things.
Yeah. So I start out with the fact, and I say this all the time, whether it's my own statistic or one that I pulled off the internet the other day, 90% of 15,000 new food products fail annually. And that is a lot to do with, there are more than you would think that believe they can bootstrap. And probably one of the hardest things about this industry is bootstrapping. And I just acquired a new client as an example, and he is using his own money for the first 6 months until he gets to the point that he needs to raise money. And so that's really what I like to focus on, is understanding how much money you need and understanding whether or not you should really go out for seed money right away. And it's a two-edged sword as well, because going out right away, the only options that you really have are friends and family, because most investors will not invest in a brand that does not have any kind of traction.
Yep. Yep, I've been there. I did friends and family first. I totally agree with you. It's like the people who already know you and believe in you and want to support you, right? With that, don't go, I always say don't have your grandmother mortgage your house, right? Only take it from people who can afford to lose it. But after that, talk to us about like where the market is at right now and what traction means. Because when I was doing this in the consumer product space, I was able to raise 500,000 without any sales, but I had gone out and gotten letters of intent from all these big, um, I wasn't really with retailers at that point. It was like bigger hotel chains and stuff like that. But there was some proof of concept there, right? That validated the idea was wanted and there was interest and all that. What are you seeing right now? Like, what do you consider traction for someone to be able to go out and get seed money from angel investors? We're not even going to talk about VCs because they're like a whole nother ball game of requirements and very, very challenging to get funding for an early stage consumer product. So let's focus on even angel investors. What kind of traction do you think people need to get attention?
Well, ideally, you need to have been at least in your what I call your test market, where you can show and traction's about not only gaining the distribution at the shelf and the positioning, but understanding and this is where a lot of entrepreneurs also fail too, is understanding your velocity in store. And that that will tell the investor that your concept has been tested, that you know and understand that you're getting repeat customers and that you're increasing the category as well. So all the things that you really need for the investor, and the investor likes to to know more about that if they're a savvy investor, understanding what it takes to get into this business. But also it's just really important to understand that to increase and scale your business as well. And it's one place that the entrepreneur fails, and fails, unfortunately, because they don't understand that they have the consumer. They don't understand whether or not they're bringing new consumers to the category. And the retailer, as you continue to expand your business, you're going to have those metrics to get into um, new retailers. The retailer needs to know that in order for them to understand that your product's going to make a change in their categories.
Yeah, I definitely found that to be true. So would love to get your perspective on this. I met with someone a couple of weeks ago. I love their product, right? And think it rings so true what you said. People typically don't fail because their product sucks, right? Like there's a lot of good products that end up on the chopping block. I love her product. It's amazing. It's like really high quality, well done, blah, blah, blah. I wish someone had like shaken me and told me this, when I was doing this, that to stay focused on maybe one retailer and prove it and make it really successful that with that one retailer, rather than trying to get into all the retailers, limping along with all of them, jumping through all their various hoops, and then having mediocre sell through at like 10 retailers, right? So what's your perspective? Does that strategy work these days? Like go with even, can you give a retailer an exclusive for a couple of years and really just hammer home with that one retailer and also maybe sell online or something like that? Like, what would you say? What's the strategy that you see working to be as efficient as possible as a really early stage consumer product company?
Well, yes, absolutely. One retailer. I am not, and this comes from having been with 7-Eleven and also the way that Whole Foods has operated for years. I'm not big on exclusivity because that can prevent you from really scaling. but finding a good, solid retailer that you can partner with and you can actually test, and you can test different locations in the store, different locations on the shelf. You can test display options, all of those things, and really monitoring that is a good plan. I usually like to talk to the entrepreneur about trying to focus not just on one retailer, but to focus on one retailer per channel. So one retailer in grocery, and one retailer in convenience, and one retailer in food service, depending on your product and your brand and what your objectives are. But if you can, if ideally, if you can make that happen and be successful at it, even for a 6-month period, and then really measure your results and tweak along the way, ideally, you've got a plan then to move on to a regional launch. And a lot of times we as entrepreneurs also, we start getting some traction in the beginning, and we get into some retailers, and like you said, several retailers, and we also may spread ourselves across different geographic areas, which is disastrous. So the second step after being able to ideally do what we just described is to then go into a region and find your anchor retailer, and then expand around them accordingly. So that is really the next step. And by doing this slow beginning of scale, you're also being able to do this with less funding, and then you can manage long term how your funding is going to really need to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. I agree. Yeah, definitely with the the regional thing. Do you see, quick follow up on that? Do you see, and I know every category is, I'm sure, a little bit different, but do you always recommend people just start in your own backyard, or are there different areas that are better test markets than others?
I absolutely recommend that you start in your backyard. The only time that I would not is if it does not align with the consumer, or the positioning of the product. And that's going to be rare that happens. It's so much easier starting in your backyard because you're close to it, unless you're willing to move to the most ideal market. Over the years, I've done several analysis for launch plans, and I base them on syndicated data and combination of geographic preferences, the consumer dynamics, and so forth, and align them to the product, and guided entrepreneurs all along the launch and scaling of the business that way. But it's unless you're willing to move to the most ideal market, it's best to start in your own backyard.
Yeah. And typically you can find some cheerleaders who want to support local and stuff like that too.
Yeah.
Let's see. So let's go into real quick. What is your recommendation on pitching retailers? Because I think this is a big one. If someone's early stage, they are just getting started, they're bootstrapping. I know for me, like I had to go to 3 different buyers at Whole Foods. I got rejected 3 times before they finally, would be willing to place an order and give me a chance. What do you see as maybe some of the hardest retailers to get into right now? Some of the maybe easier, or any advice on pitching retailers and in that really early stage? Like, because just getting in can be the hard part, right? And then creating the sell through. But let's start with getting in. What are your recommendations there?
Well, twofold. By the way, I consider Whole Foods one of the hardest in the country.
Okay.
And yet at the same time, I have encouraged entrepreneur after entrepreneur to not worry about Whole Foods in the beginning, because they're very difficult. They do offer one of the best opportunities for new brands to really to be successful, to get seen because of their product selection and so forth. But in pitching retailers, you're going to, first of all, going back to the backyard, but also all retailers, depending on the category, all major retailers and chains of 20 to 30 stores or more, for sure, have a system of evaluating products, a time of year. And then in the example of Whole Foods, even if you are selected during the evaluation period, it could be 8 months before you're actually on the shelf. And so pitching, ideally in the early stages, finding those small regional retail chains that are good, and there's a ton of them depending on your market, that are good, solid, willing to take on products where they don't have extensive schematic or changing the shelf space. I'll talk a little bit to the person who doesn't know this industry, that everything is based on fitting you into the shelf, and that's why the timeliness of this happens. And so if you can find, to start out with, a couple of small regional retailers that will take on products outside their normal schematic changes and category approvals. If you can find those first and really test with them, and then understanding, and this is where, if you don't know this industry, having a business expert like me as an example is really, really important, because I've called on every channel in the country. I've called on every retailer in the country. I understand their strategies. I understand when they're most likely to do their schematic changes, and what you need for approvals. And as we get into the bigger retailers, you're going to need the things that I talked about earlier in this call. Whether it's for investors or retailers, you're going to need to have very specific metrics that help them to understand why because you're going to be replacing another product.
Yeah.
Our stores don't grow by size. In order to replace something that's not selling on the shelf, and to be able to convince the retailer that you are going to help them incrementally grow their category with your product, is the most key thing that retailers are looking for. And then we could talk about marketing and all the other aspects of building the business, but that's at the heart of it.
Yeah. Well, and I think what all that spells is that it can be a very slow process, right? And the problem there is funding, right? When there's not a quick way to scale, and this is assuming you're profitable, which is challenging, because as you're touching on marketing and all kinds of distributor fees and all this stuff that plays into that, it can be really tough to even be profitable. So back to the funding piece, what are you seeing as, for a consumer product, the ones that you are seeing with success to, maybe even reach, let's just say 5 million in revenue? What are you seeing people raising right now to get a good foothold, to get out there and really get solid traction? Or do you have any idea? Like any?
Yeah.
I think.
Well, I do. I actually do. Have been writing business plans for a long time, and I wrote my own template, which builds from the bottom up. So it builds by retailer, by estimated velocities. And then, of course, you've got all the expenses, the marketing expenses, trade spending, et cetera. And over and over again, I will tell you, especially pre-revenue and just starting out, it's a minimum before you even get to the retailer. It's $200,000 to $500,000 to really get off the ground and begin to, so that you're ready to go into retailers and the cost of going in. And then most of the time, I really focus on forcing the business plans to be to show profitability in year number 4. 1, 2, and 3 are not showing profitability. It's very difficult. I did just do a business plan for a gentleman where it was tight, but I was able to do his plan so that he was profitable in year 4, probably at about 5 million, if I remember right. And he would have to raise 750,000 over the first 3 years. And that's really, really tight.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. That's barely paying yourself, right? But that is super helpful to know, because I think that part of the challenge for early stage entrepreneurs going out to pitch investors is they don't know what to put down for projections, right? And it's like, I don't know, you're just pulling things out of thin air. But I think if you can lay out and you want to be realistic with investors, right? If you show we're going to be profitable in 6 months, they're going to roll their eyes. If you show you're not going to be profitable for 10 years, they're going to be like, I'm out. So I think that's a really good just kind of rule of thumb that you just kind of laid out there. Acceptable to be not profitable for the first 3 years, but after 3 years, whatever your plan is, you should be starting to turn a profit at that point. So I think that's great feedback.
Just going to add to that real quick. In year 4, the reason that I do my best to force profitability is because by year 4, you've expanded your marketplace. You may have even scaled to national distribution, and you're really offering for the investor the idea that this is what the company will look like if we're ticking on all levels.
Yeah, I love that. That makes sense. Amazing. Okay, so once, let's talk about this 250 to 500,000 to get off the ground, right? To just get things going. Where are you seeing people raise that money? Is that all friends and family, or are you seeing angel investors? Are there any early stage groups putting in at that round, or kind of what are you seeing? And then same question for once somebody is at, let's just say 2 million in revenue. Are they then going to VCs, or are you seeing them angel groups, or sticking with just kind of wealthy individual angel investors?
Well, it's fine. I'll answer the second part first. Is usually when you've got the opportunity to get into VCs or private equity, even, but more VCs, and you're usually at 5 to 10 million in revenues, and whether or not you're profitable yet. And there's tons in this particular industry. There are tons of people who have started. They've sold their brands. They've been that fortunate one who has sold their brands, and they've started up their own equity groups, and they invest in brands that they've known and grown up with. Mark Rampolla, who founded Zico coconut water, is a great example of that. And he was one of the investors in the Rebel, the beverage, the Rebel, because he believed in the CEO, who had come from another major food brand, and it goes on and on. And so then to go back and answer your first question, when I throw out that you've got to raise from friends and family, it's important to understand that friends and family, know to believe in you. But what happens really is you're going to your friends and family, you're showing them the idea and asking them to refer you to someone that might be interested in investing. You're not necessarily going out to mom and dad, like you said, or grandma's mortgaging her house for you, but you're using your current network to build on your network. And where from that, you have the opportunity to really get in front of angels a lot of times because somebody knows an angel or an angel group. And also angels can be found. There's a gentleman here in Southwest Florida that actually runs one of the largest angel investment groups in the state of Florida. And they they have meetings once a month, and they first of all evaluate and review whether or not you're going to have the opportunity to present, and then you can present. And sometimes that will that will lead to investment even before even could lead pre-revenues.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Yeah, it just comes down to networking and putting it out there and asking for follow-on introductions. And I think too, planting the seed with those angel groups early, they want to follow along. Nobody wants to be left out. So if there's the next up and coming thing, they might want to keep tabs on your progress. And it's much easier to go back to them in a couple of years if they saw, if they see how much progress you've made since you first talked to them. So yeah, I think putting it out there and just networking like a mad person is the key there. Amazing. Okay. So talk to us a little bit about your other 10 pillars. Like what, and how did this start? And tell us a little bit about kind of where you're at now and why you're so passionate about helping people.
Yeah, so the 10 pillars I actually wrote when we started, maybe even a little bit before Metabrand, but by the time that we built the company called Metabrand, which we helped to so many entrepreneurs in so many aspects, I had already been the CEO or the SVP of sales and marketing in a key role that led me to understand every vertical in this industry. And so I wanted a platform that we could use to sell our services. And that platform became the 10 pillars to a successful company, because these are all the areas that you need to either go out and get expertise or have the expertise yourself to make it happen. and so that's how it led to that. And after having worked now with several entrepreneurs, I just get jazzed. I was talking to an old industry friend who's now a client earlier today, and I said, I just love to talk about this industry. And I really get really passionate with entrepreneurs when they have a product idea that I can resonate with. As a matter of fact, I've gotten to the point I've always been really pretty fortunate to work with brands or even for brands that I really believed in. And that really helps a lot. And if I don't, then it's not going to be a good relationship because it's hard to guide. But that also, I do want to talk about pillar number 1 and pillar number 2 and pillar number 4 in particular. I've just done a series on those, and market opportunity and consumer need is pillar number 1. And I've nicknamed that Will It Sell Guide. And actually, I have a free.debbywildry.com download of an overview of that. But the bottom line is if you've got a great product, but you have not really understood, maybe the consumer need comes from the fact that you can't find you have a need for a product and you've been making it yourself at home and you can't find it anywhere on the shelf. doesn't really mean that all consumers need this product like you do. It doesn't really mean that just because you haven't seen it on the shelf that it isn't there. And so really identifying that as before you spend thousands of dollars in product development. And then the second one being product differentiation and helping to define that as you work through that first pillar. And then number 4 is what I call a viable business model. But before actually going into production, you've studied your competition, you know what price point you can command, and you've used that to back into your cost of goods and your supply chain cost, and you just on a back of a paper napkin. It's easy to do if you understand, you've been able to do your cost of goods and understand what they are, to make sure that you're going to, on the surface, be profitable. And it's just, those 3 are so important. Some of the other pillars are sales and distribution and the things that we know we have to be doing in order to get our product out there. The team, the infrastructure, the team, those are all aspects. But those 3 plus number 10 is financial, are really just so critical before you even begin. And so many times the entrepreneur begins without understanding those things.
Yeah, I definitely was there. I think too, I'd love to get your take on this. In my experience, being first isn't always best. I was the person who had the thing at home that I couldn't buy and saw, a need for it in the market, but it's very expensive. I learned the hard way to educate an industry and to create a category, right? So if there's nothing else like you out there, that isn't always a good thing. It can be, and now, the category I was in is like an established, multi-billion dollar category, but there was no shelf space for my product when I started. So how do you navigate that? If somebody has this new idea, but there's no spot for them on the shelf, or, do you recommend like go online, build up the consumer group there? That's one of the things I wish I did, was focused online first and then got the traction and went to retail. But I was trying to go to off-premise, on-premise, online, everything all at once and spread too thin. So what do you think there? What's your take on direct to consumer if, you're not, if your category or your product isn't proven in the market yet?
I think direct to consumer is a really good way to start. It depends on what your product is, because obviously there can be some complications. I think you mentioned that yours was an alcohol product. And so there's all kinds of complications there. Certain beverages, depending on how you do them, are difficult to expensive to ship. And so there's some tactical aspects of going online first that could prevent you from being profitable, for sure. But overall, I would answer that question with yes. That's a really good way to test your concept. It's also a way, people today talk about, well, I can, I'm going to market this with social media. How many followers do you have right now? 5,000. Well, even if you have 100,000 followers, you're not even beginning to touch the consumer. But with entering the market with online first or direct to consumer, you're accomplishing 2 things. You're communicating with the consumer and you're keeping your cost of entry down while you figure out whether or not the product is really going to sell. And you could probably, as well, get some real consumer feedback that you would have to spend several $1,000s on focus groups as an example. So, it's threefold, I think, the benefits of doing that.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I think, again, back to just being focused and getting feedback that is simple and easy to understand for investors and for other retailers. Like some actual traction with metrics can just help paint a story that grabs attention, for investors and future retailers. If you haven't had the patience to kind of go through those motions, over and over and over to gain some metrics and show some, even just small growth, but consistent, can be really powerful, right? Versus it doesn't have to be this like hockey stick, thing right out of the gate. I will say, so one, this one pops into my head. I'd love to interview this woman at some point, but she started Zoodles, the gluten-free like mac and cheese. And she went out and I think, she raised something like over 20 million in her seed round, but she came from a crazy consumer product background. I don't know. She worked at either one of the huge companies or, I don't know what her background was, but I think too, if you get all that money out of the gate, obviously so far, at least from an outsider's perspective, it seems like they're crushing it. They're in all the stores and I'm sure doing pretty well. But I think in that early stage, like you said, making some mistakes. So you don't, if someone just gives you 5 million and you haven't tested the market and got to know your consumer or, all that, you can waste a lot of money, and make a lot of mistakes. So, I think your advice on really learning as much as you can early, is spot on. What other success stories have you seen recently that people can look to in the consumer product space as examples of how they've done it or what they've done right?
I usually like to one thing about consumer products is you hear all these stories about the what I call anomalies, but the latest one, and I like to refer the entrepreneur to books written by people who have done this, and they've done it in a way that has taken a lot of years, but had a really good ending to it. And there's a beverage called Bai, BAI. And the founder of Bai, who ended up selling his brand to Keurig Dr. Pepper for $1.7 billion. It took him
I've never even heard of that.
Oh, you haven't?
No, BAI. No, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. I don't think so. I can't picture it.
Oh, wow. I've been drinking it for years, but that's interesting. Yeah. You can find it on all kinds of shelves today. It took them a long time to get there. I used to buy it after yoga because it's a flavored water and it's got coffee berry in it. And this coffee berry gives you a little energy. And at the same time, when you're coming out of a hot yoga class, you want something with a little bit of flavor. And they used, a natural sweetener but anyway, he did. Yeah, he sold it after several years and several millions of dollars being raised to Dr. Pepper Curry, and he's written a book called Base Mentality, Basement Mentality, and for some reason I always miss his name, but it's a great book. Let me look that up real quick while I start.
Like the basement of a house, basement.
Yeah. So he started out of his basement and
got it. Okay.
And here he is, Ben Wise, BenWeiss. And he tells the early stories. He's got all kinds of stories in his book. And I actually listened to it on through Audible, and he's doing the recording. So it makes it even better if your audience likes to listen. But it's a really good book for entrepreneurs in general, but especially the food and beverage business, because, talking about things like the first time that a truck delivers product to your warehouse, And the trucker says, how are you going to get this pallet off the truck? No, I don't unload the pallet for you. and, and somehow the trucker ends up feeling sorry for him and ends up helping him case by case take all the product off the trailer. I mean, those are things that you need to know in this industry, and he's a really good one. The other one that I've always referred people to is Mark Rampolo, and he is the founder of Zico, and eventually sold it to Coca-Cola, and now has bought it back from Coca-Cola. So he's back running his brand, but he was a executive in South America for years with International Paper. Thought, I'm this brilliant guy that knows how to get things done, and I've been doing very experienced, and I want to start my own brand. And he's a very good example of early on the trials and tribulations of mortgaging his house, all kinds of things. But very much a success story. And so when I think about successes in this industry, I like to recommend books because they're eye-opening with regard to what it takes to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Love that. Yeah, I remember one of my favorites was Rubies in the Orchard, the woman who started the pomegranate juice. A great, great book also. Yeah.
Oh, I've never read that one. Yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah. Amazing. Okay, well, tell us, where else can people find you if they are in the food and beverage space? If they need some help, like how are you working with people and what does that look like and where can they reach out to you?
Okay, great. Well, I'm at DebbieWildrick.com, DebbieWildrick.com. And right on the front page of my website is my phone number, is my email address. And so I can definitely be found there. I can be found on LinkedIn, and I'll use my most recent client, who is self-funding his brand, as an example of how I like to work with you. And there are different ways to work together, but this particular gentleman, I put in front of him a 6-month arrangement where I coach him on a monthly basis. We do weekly calls and so forth. And I take him step by step. He's right in the beginning. We had our first meeting yesterday, and I gave him what he's actually doing a coconut water from Thailand, and he is just starting, and I gave him several assignments to pull together all of his costs that he's gotten so far, and we're gonna put together the concept, and then next week when we meet, we'll follow up. He's working on collecting all his competition. We'll put together the concept, do a little bit of market testing on paper with the consumer, so we can touch on the product, the market opportunity and the consumer need, as I talked about, and then we'll start moving in to setting up the business, and I actually do a critical path document that keeps us on track with regard to timing, so that we get this launch done.
Very cool. Wow. Yeah, that can be worth a lot right there, just because time is of the essence when you're trying to get off the ground. And not because, the longer it takes, the more money you're spending. So it is critical to keep moving forward as quickly as possible, efficiently, I should say. But amazing. Well, thank you, Debbie. What a wealth of knowledge and experience you have, and helping people out there. I think, like you said in the beginning, you help people that you resonate with their product. And I think if you're in the early stage, that is what it's all about. It's finding people who believe in your product, believe in what you're doing, and are going to get behind you and root for you along the way, because those people are critical in that early stage. Yeah. And you don't always know who they're going to be. So, you reach out. I think just like networking for investors, it's those advisors can really be equally important as funding in those early stages and business in general along the way. But
Absolutely.
amazing. Anything else you want to add?
I think that's it. Good luck.
Yeah, it's so fun. And, I am proof that even when it isn't the giant $1.6 billion payout at the end, it is still totally worth it. You learn so much along the way, and it's just fun. And, I think at the end, it's like one of those, like, what the heck do I know? And then you realize, like, oh, wow, I learned a lot through that process, So
Yeah.
it's never a waste. And somebody's got to sell it for $1 billion, right? So I say go for it. So amazing. Thank you, Debbie. So good to connect. And we'll see you next time.